Okay, Councillor Smith. Thank you.
Okay, folks, welcome to the Housing Subcommittee meeting of Thursday the 8th of May. Could I remind everyone that this meeting will be recorded and that the recording will be subsequently available for public listening. Okay, item number 1, do we have any apologies? I've got apologies from Councillor Ian Crothers. Do we have any other apologies?
Councillors McClung and Geddes.
Jeff?
Okay, thank you. I've noted all those apologies, and in fact we've got a substitute, Ronnie Nicholson, this morning.
Okay, thanks very much. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any? No. Okay then, item number 3, Housing Support Strategic Commission, a report by the Director of Community and Customer Services. Can I ask John if he's got anything to add to the report, or John, you want to make your mind up and let me know?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add to the report. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, can I open it up to members? Any questions? Jeff? Plug yourself in, Jeff.
It is quite a while since some of these were reviewed, and therefore I think it is something which you need to do. But I notice it says that the service user, or will ensure the service user is aware of the forthcoming changes and possible eligibility to alternative provision identified. How are we actually going to do that? Is it on a one-by-one basis?
We've met with each of the providers who are going to be terminating their contracts, but who can then renew, bid for the new contracts, and we're working with them with an exit plan and an exit strategy over the next few months, so that everybody will be identified, all the service users will be identified, and where possible, identified need will be assessed and put onto other services throughout social work and other services if they fit the criteria.
Any other members? Can I just ask, could you give us a bit more detail on what the main difference is between the current service provision that we fund and what we're proposing to fund? Which areas effectively will be taken out of the, quite specifically? I know there's general comment in the report about the fact it's obviously focused on effectively our legal requirements around homelessness. So what exactly will we be effectively removing from what we fund at the moment? And I suppose more importantly, are we working with other agencies and social work to fill that gap, should that obviously be determined it's no longer a housing issue?
Thanks, Chair. Members will be aware that these contracts were inherited by the Council way back in 2003, and to some extent the services that they provided were within prescribed parameters. There were 12 prescribed housing support services in 2003, but the ring fence has subsequently been removed from that budget. So the services that provided vary considerably. Some provide care services, for example the Lowland Group that's listed at table 2 in the report. It primarily provides care services to people with high levels of need. Whereas, for example, Alcohol and Drugs South West do do as it's described. They provide alcohol and drug support services, but referrals come from a wide range or come from a wide range of agencies. That can be self-referral, social work referral, referral from other parts of the voluntary sector. But what is clear when we reviewed the service, that though the providers, there's no criticism implicit within the report, they're not actually delivering what the council needs and where it's needed. What we're actually required to do is that last year the council got new statutory duties to provide housing support services to a range of homeless people. And at the moment, because these services are historical, they're doing that in part, but the whole of their service isn't targeted towards delivering either the council's strategic priorities or statutory duties. So the re-tendering process is aimed at giving the council much more control over the services, specifying much more clearly what we want delivered, and then putting in place a range of performance measures that will allow us to ensure that what we're asking to be delivered is delivered. So the current provision, the best description would be it's a historical patchwork quilt, to be honest, that we inherited. In terms of the new provision, yes, we have been in discussion with social work services, and one of the kind of key issues that came out of that was the ongoing need for a dedicated alcohol and drug support service. So that recommendation within the report, within the Commission, was a result of discussion with Jim Parker and his role in relation to drug services across social work and NHS. Social work and NHS have been consulted as we've developed this report. It's taken quite a long period of time to develop, and quite a lot of discussion has taken place. So we'd like to think we've actually done quite a thorough job on it. But unfortunately, if we're wanting to meet the council's core duties and meet the council's statutory duties, the only way that can actually be done is to terminate, re-tender, refocus. If not, we'll have services kind of almost, random would be the wrong word. The inherited position would be unequally spread across the region and not giving people the access that they needed at various points across the region. Don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does. I suppose the other point is that I appreciate it's a commissioning process. I tend more towards a kind of partnership process than commissioning, but we have a commissioning framework as a council. In terms of the discussions with the current providers, I'm not going to say is there buy-in, because actually, when you propose a 10% reduction in the budget and the potential for current organisations no longer to provide something, they're not going to shake your hand and thank you for it. But what discussions have taken place so far with the current providers, and are they fully on board with the direction of travel we're taking?
There were initial discussions following service review with all housing support providers about the direction of travel, how we're going to take a phased approach to the recommissioning of services, and we undertook a lot of training with providers to allow them to be able to tender for new contracts as and when the opportunity arises. So we worked in partnership with an organisation called Fourth Sector, and what their job was to work with the providers to increase their skills and knowledge about competitive tendering processes so that they're able to take advantage of these opportunities when they come up. In terms of the contracts listed to be terminated in the report, I think the description you've given, Chair's probably accurate. We've met with every one of the providers, and of course none of them are saying thank you very much, we really want you to terminate our contract. However, all of the providers recognise the need to do what we're doing, and all of them have indicated their willingness to participate in the tender process. So while they would rather that we weren't recommissioning services, as far as they can be, they are signed up to what we're doing, and none have indicated that they believe what we're recommending to committee is in fact the completely wrong thing to do. So to that degree, there's buy-in. However, of course, none of them are thanking us for recommending their contract to be terminated. They understand the strategic reasons, they understand the statutory reasons, and they understand the best value reasons. And we've met with them all, I think, in the last month or so in the run-up to committee, and as far as I'm aware, none of the providers listed in the report have made other representation to members, which indicates that there's a degree of acceptance about what we're doing and the strategic reasons for that.
Can I just ask one final question, and I'll bring Graham in? The figures for the breakdown of the budget allocations, what's the? I mean, I appreciate there's a separate figure for alcohol and drug support, Dumfries and Galloway. What's the basis for the breakdown in each of the districts? How have you calculated what the funding allocation is for each area?
Thanks, Chair. What we've tried to do is, as I described, the current position in relation to the contracts is that they're located for historical reasons, going back to 2003. What we're trying to do with the recommissioning process is deliver services actually where they're needed. So what we've done is looked at the pattern of homeless presentations across the region and the demands in the service in various parts of the region, and the way that the budget's been allocated, we hope, is a reflection of those pressures on the homeless service. Members will also be aware that the homeless service transferred back to strategic housing from social work services last Monday, and there is a need to refocus the activity of the homeless service, and we see the recommissioning of these services being a key support to that service going forward.
Okay, Brian, again.
Would I be right in assuming then that these figures that have been allocated across the region for the specific areas are not red-lined, as it were? They're just indicative figures as regards the pressures that have been felt historically regarding the expectation of business that will come forward, so that more accurately what we're doing is addressing the problems as they arise, but giving indicative figures with regard to what we can expect coming forward. And can I just on the back of that ask if there are any identified benefits of the Common Housing Register being rolled out? I'm referring there to 311, and the sentence begins, "We will also need to work with local housing providers," and so on and so forth. Has this helped? Is there benefits to come from the rollout of the Common Housing Register and that relationship with RSLs?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The contracts that will be awarded will be 3-year contracts with an option to extend them to 5 years. And the approach that we've taken through the commissioning process is this is our best estimate of where we think the services are required based on historical patterns of demand. When I say historical, we've looked at current figures, but we aren't able to project accurately going forward. So, as part of the commissioning process, the reason we've taken a phased approach is that if there is too much demand in one location and not enough demand in another location, we can address that through future phases in the commissioning process. So it's not a fixed position going forward. There's the opportunity after 3 years to relook at the contract and re-tendering it if it's not delivering what we want and where we need it. There's also an opportunity, if demand is greater than supply, to increase the amount of outreach services as part of the next phase of strategic commissioning. So it's quite a flexible approach that we're adopting, and we hope that by doing that we'll be able to meet demand where it occurs. In terms of benefits to the CHR, that's linked to changes that are required in the homeless service. One of the key issues in the RSL sector is that they feel that they're often getting people referred to them that aren't having their support needs met, and that can cause RSLs difficulties when they come to allocate a tenancy. So a big part of this focusing exercise is to work with the homeless service to make sure that services are targeted at homeless people in need, and that is then tracked through with their Section 5 referral and into the start of their new tenancy. The aim is to obviously reduce difficulties that RSLs experience, but also to reduce incidences of repeat homelessness as well, because that's still a problem in the region. But what we would do, to go back to your original point, is if demand exceeds supply, we would address that in the next phase strategic commission.
Graham, were you wanting in?
Yep, thanks, Chair. Brian partly solved some of the queries I had. When you were speaking, Jim, you said, I mean, it's obvious the providers were not happy with this, but so be it. 3.5 bullet point 4, the way I read it, there's a reticence of providers to tender, yet you said, if need be, they're all still in the sidelines more or less and will tender if they do so. Either there's a reticence or there's not. If I could have clarification on that. My second point's a very simple one. Your allocation, 14 Stranraer, 6 Annan, etc., etc. I mean, that's there, that's based on best judgment and available information. I accept that. Here's a hypothetical question. If you needed, or if the 14 in Stranraer were all fully utilised, would you relocate somebody to, say, Castle Douglas before you made extra space available in Stranraer? Or would you try and accommodate them as near to where they belong as possible?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the bullet point at 3.5, the first phase of Strategic Commission was focused on homeless services that also provide accommodation as part of that service. So part of the reason that there was a relatively, well, a lower level of interest than we would have anticipated was because it's very specialist, and anybody wanting to bid needed to have access to accommodation to meet the criteria in the tender specification. So that narrowed the number of organisations that were able to take part in the bidding process. What we're anticipating this time round, because it's outreach and not tied to accommodation, that it'll be much more open to a wider range of organisations, and we'll hopefully see a higher level of interest because they aren't required to come with accommodation as part of the service. In terms of how we hope to manage the homeless service going forward, again, we're aware that there are some historical practices that involve homeless people being relocated around the region, and that's one of the key things that we would like to see addressed as an early action in terms of taking the service forward within strategic housing. It's clearly inappropriate to take a homeless application in Stranraer and place the person in Dumfries or vice versa. So what we would be aiming to do is place the person in accommodation as close as we can to the point of presentation. If a pattern emerges that we're not able to do that because the accommodation isn't where it's required, then again we would propose to address that through the next phase Strategic Commission. We wouldn't see it as good service and acceptable service to be moving homeless people around the region in future, and it's not a practice we would want to continue.
Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Foster sort of asked part of the question I had in regard to 3.5 as well, but just as a follow-on from that, I wonder if Mr O'Neill has a feeling that because of the sort of limited interest within the tendering for this commission, whether that would had possibly made the tenders unduly high towards to what they might have been if there was more contractors interested in tendering for that, because of the limited number and the specifics of the tender as you stated. I just wonder if that would possibly keep the tenders at a higher value than necessary. And if that was the case, would that apply to Table 2 as well on the contracts here? And secondly, just as regard to Table 2 and the termination of the contract, etc., do we have any sort of timescales involved between the ending of these contracts and the start of the new ones being commissioned? I appreciate it's in the report about the lengthy time taken, and the current suppliers will keep that level of support ongoing until the new contracts are interested. And because of your budget saving analysis here, which comes into 2015-16, is that the sort of date that you're aiming for to have these contracts referred to?
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the bids that come in, the way that we're approaching this is that there'll be a fixed budget. So those that want to participate in the tendering process will be made aware of that through the advertising that we do, and any tenders that come in above the fixed budget would be rejected because they don't meet the criteria. and that's how we're able to achieve the savings. So it's not an open tendering process where anybody can come in and bid anything. We'll be saying that's the budget available in that location and invite bids on that basis. The reason that bids tend to be of a higher value, again, is related to the historical situation that we find ourselves in. We got these contracts in 2003, and there has been no uplift applied to these contracts since 2003. So the value has been fixed for the last 11 years, and obviously, as we're all aware, the cost of living and everything else has increased, including staffing costs, fuel costs, office costs, utility costs. So what we're getting with the new bids are probably more sustainable contract values, where providers are submitting bids that actually reflect their operating costs. At the moment, there's a lot of cross-subsidy going on in organisations, and they've had to make savings within their organisations to keep these services going. So this tendering process is an opportunity to deal with that, and it's an alternative to actually uplifting these contracts on an annual basis. So the cost will much more accurately reflect the bid. That makes sense?
So there's no, during the 3-year period, there's no uplift at all in any of the years now?
There has been no uplift since 2003.
I mean, the new contracts, there'll be no uplift in the 3-year period. And in terms of phase 1 contracts that have already been awarded, were they for 3 years as well? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Were you wanting back in, Brian? Yeah. Oh, sorry, Craig. Sorry.
Chair, just the second part, the timescales of the new commissioning.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We've got a target of awarding the contracts in November of this year. That's because they need to be advertised in the European Journal and go through a very prescribed advertising process with prescribed timescales. The existing contracts are entitled to 3 months' notice. What we won't be doing today is, if members agree the recommendation, is going out and providing 3 months' notice, because that could result in a period of no services, and that would be not good strategic planning. So what we'll do is wait till we're absolutely clear about the date we can award these contracts, and at that point we'll give the providers 3 months' notice, and they've all been made aware of that. But because we're recommending savings to feed into the budget process for next year, it's obviously absolutely vital that all this is done and dusted by April of next year. However, the target is November.
Okay, Brian.
Thanks, Colin. Just for reassurance, I would ask that this council is doing everything in its power to ensure that we don't confront people in homeless accommodation with bills at the end of that term by putting, for example, their furniture in storage because they have to use what's in the accommodation already, and that hasn't been moved out to accommodate their 3-piece suite or whatever they actually own at the time. This is something that's been dragging on for some time, I have to say, from my point of view, and I would appreciate some clarification around that.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, we got the homeless service back last Monday, and I think it would be fair to say that it requires significant work to get it to perform in a way that we would want it to be performing. So what we would propose to do, I think it's John that's line managing that, is to take an early report back to this committee about the issues and pressures that the service faces and our proposals going forward to tackle them. Part of that will be how we manage temporary accommodation and how we deal with issues like storage and charges. But I think John will maybe want to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Jim's absolutely right. We need to have an early review of the state of the whole of the homeless service, and there will be reports coming back. There'll be a report coming back to this subcommittee in terms of some of the elements of the homeless service, but there's also a role for the CCS committee in terms of the organisational setup and what we want to do there. So there'll be a series of reports coming back to both Housing Sub and the new CCS committee, looking at what we need to do. And at this stage, we're talking about probably a kind of 12-month time frame and a kind of an improvement plan approach to tackle the many issues, one of which Councillor Collins has touched on. But that will be coming forward over the next month or so.
Thanks very much. It just seems to me a hell of a contradiction where we are helping people in homeless accommodation but landing them with a huge storage bill at the end of their term in that homeless accommodation for storing their furniture, because we were insisting previously at least that they use what furniture was already provided in that accommodation. And that's certainly not helping people get back on their feet. So I would say thanks very much to the officers for their responses today, and I look forward to hearing a report that eliminates that sort of pressure being exerted on our more vulnerable in Dumfries and Galloway.
Can I just pick up one point on the back of the transfer of homelessness effectively from social work to housing? There's not almost a contradiction that in the report we're obviously transferring the support side of things from housing to social work. In terms of, I mean, is that not kind of almost not a swap deal or anything like that, I presume, but there's obviously you give us your thoughts on maybe the reasons specifically for that.
Thanks, Chair. I would say it's most definitely not a swap deal, which is why we need ongoing discussion. The swap deal won't happen. The reason for it is because obviously we've got the integration of adult services and NHS going forward in terms of future service delivery. And as we understand it, the first phase of that organisational change in the way social work and health services are configured will be focused on older people. And one of the things that we've discussed with our colleagues in the past is the need for different models of sheltered housing going forward. And the question for us, and it is a question, is under those new organisational arrangements where there are very strong links to care services. So what we often find, in particularly in very sheltered housing, is that people are getting a mixture of housing support services and care services, a la the Trust Housing Association meeting we're going to have next week. So does it make sense to have those two elements of service sitting in different organisational structures and potentially the strategic planning not being as well integrated as it could be? Now, what the report isn't saying is that we would look to go away and have discussions with NHS and social work and agree this. What we would do is have discussions about principles and way forward, and we'd bring a report back to this committee for members to consider. But really what we're trying to achieve in doing it is to have a holistic approach to the needs of older people going forward, and not of different levels and different tiers and different directions of accountability. So that's the thinking behind it. But we don't know if that's what will be the result of the discussions, because we haven't had them in any detail yet, and it would come back here.
And obviously all the models around all that integration of work are still to be ironed out. I think it's probably the diplomatic way of putting it. Do we have any other points? Okay, folks, can we turn to the recommendations then? Okay, are members happy to note recommendation 2.1? Okay, happy to agree 2.2? I would say happy to agree 2.3, but are you in agreement with 2.3? Okay, and to note 2.4? Okay, thanks very much. Okay, can we turn to item number 4? Sorry, Ronnie.
My apologies, I should have declared an interest in this item, as I'm a landlord, so I'll need to leave.
Okay. Anybody else to declare an interest in item number 4? No? Oh.
Chair, I suppose I should declare an interest in that I am a landlord, but from the report I don't think there's any reason to leave the building, as it's more strategic than affecting landlords personally.
Okay, thanks for that, Craig. Okay, then can we turn to item number 4 then? It's regarding the landlord accreditation scheme. Can I ask John if he's got anything to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. This is just a follow-up report to the review of the scheme of assistance that was considered in March. Our members asked us to go away and look at the potential viability of linking any BTS grants for private sector landlords to membership of landlord accreditation we've done that, we've looked at it, and the conclusion is that we don't think it's sustainable because of the reasons set out in the report, but quite happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so the recommendations there. Craig, do you want to ask any questions?
Yes,
on
Chair. Just initially, as I think it was my request at the last meeting to look at this situation, and I thank Mr Lynch for bringing the report through. I've read the report. I'm more than happy with it and quite happy to go with the recommendations.
Okay, thanks a lot. Anybody else? Graham?
Just a general question, maybe it shouldn't be raised here, but I know within Stranraer some of the accommodation that is made available for let is really not up to standard or well maintained. How proactive? I mean, we've got the ball at our feet at the end of the day. If the property is deemed not suitable or not decorated sufficiently or anything else, we cancel the contract with them. How flexible are we in doing so? Because that's the only power I can see that we really have.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just clarify the question? Is this in relation to temporary homeless accommodation or just the private sector in general?
More temporary homes, because they tend to get put into, in my opinion, I would deem substandard properties. I mean, I can take you to houses in Stranraer. I've been invited by the people who have been placed in them. And personally, I wouldn't like to live in them, although they meet the criteria, the landlord meets the criteria, etc., etc. But we have the power of cancelling contracts at any time, surely, if the state of decoration and dryness, etc., are not up to standard. Are we prepared to use that?
Thanks, Chair. It's pretty much the same answer that I gave Councillor Collins earlier in terms of the whole range of issues that we need to tackle in relation to the homeless service. One of the things that I've been looking at over the last few weeks is the number, quality and location of the temporary accommodation that we've got and the underutilisation of some of that property. And there's not been an awful lot of activity in terms of proactively managing that portfolio. So we've got properties that have been sitting empty for weeks, if not months, and nothing done about it. That's the frank answer. One of the early actions we need to undertake is a complete audit and review of all the temporary accommodation. Legal services are currently looking at all the terms of the leases, and we'll be looking to terminate leases where we see there is no further use for those properties, and undertaking necessary repairs, which are the council's responsibility rather than landlord, to bring other properties back into use. And where we want to retain properties, but there's a landlord obligation to repair, we're looking to get that done as well. So it's a big piece of work that we're aware of. But as Jim said earlier, having only taken on the service a week past Monday, we're still at the foothills of that particular problem, but we're well aware of the issues. More broadly, in terms of the way that the private rented sector operates, obviously we have the landlord registration team who've got a significant number of enforcement powers, and we're one of the most proactive services in Scotland in making sure that landlords comply with the requirements of the registration. And there was a report, I think, that came to January's Housing Subcommittee that was presented by Alan Glendinning, covering all the work that's been going on in terms of trying to tackle private landlords through the registration process, and that's an ongoing piece of work as well.
Come back briefly, but at the end of the day, if we have a private landlord and he's not meeting his obligations or the spirit of any agreement that Dumfries and Galloway Council have with him, we have the power to terminate that contract. Is that my understanding?
Absolutely. If it's a leased accommodation for temporary homeless accommodation, we can terminate the leases. I have to say, frankly, I don't think that's happened in any great numbers over the last 2 or 3 years, and that's what we're trying to tackle now.
Okay, any other members got any questions? Brian?
I recognise what John's saying about the extent of the work that needs to be undertaken, but I would ask that we see that report as soon as possible, whilst recognising that it's early days insofar as giving a guesstimation on when that report might be forthcoming. But could you give us some sort of idea of a time frame, John, of when that report might be available?
Thanks, Chair. The plan is to bring a report to the CCS committee in June, looking at the organisational changes needed within the Directorate, and then there'll be a subsequent report to House and Sub in July, looking at the other side of the coin in terms of what we need to do strategically. So we're not looking to take this beyond the summer recess in terms of getting early messages up to members. One of the key things that we're awaiting is the Scottish Housing Regulators thematic report that's due out this week. The Director and I had a meeting with the regulators 2 weeks ago, and they gave us some verbal feedback on what's going to be in that report. Dumfries and Galloway is not going to be named specifically because it's a thematic study across the whole of Scotland, but there's some hard lessons in there for us as well as other local authorities to try and deal with, and that'll be the basis on which the report will be coming forward.
Okay. No other members? Okay, can we turn to the recommendations then? Are members happy to note first recommendation? Okay, and we're happy to agree that membership of the Accreditation Scotland scheme is not a condition. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, I don't have any other business, so can I thank members for their attendance today.